Welcome back to the show, everybody. Well, there is a film coming out on streaming platforms and DVD here in Australia that I know a lot of you are going to absolutely love. It's called Boudica, and of course it is about one of the great warriors of all time. And we actually thought we would get the director of for this amazing film on the show right now to chat about it. Welcome to the program, Jesse V. Johnson.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate you having me on.
Now, Jesse, tell us a little bit about this film and where the journey first started for you, because this is a film that's probably long overdue. This is a character that should have been brought to the screen like the way that you have a long time ago. So tell us a little bit about where this project started for you.
Well, for me, my mother had taken me to the statue of Boudica, which is a beautiful piece by Thornycroft. It's right next to the Houses of Parliament, underneath Big Ben, which gives you a small idea of how much importance the Victorians placed on this character from ancient British history. The story itself appealed to my mother, who was a single parent, very slightly wild, hippie, redhead, who liked the sort of perverse nature of taking on an empire. She thought that was brilliant with her daughters. And the story sort of stuck with me, and I've been researching it and looking it over ever since and wanted to do something with it. And it's one of those stories, the more you dig into, the more you realize, oh my God, this is absolutely drama at its very, very best. And I did look at some of the films and sort of adaptations that we made of it. I felt they fell apart in the middle section, which is this crime that is committed by the Romans against Boudica, and it's unfilmable. In reality, it was terrible. And the interesting fact about Boudica's life is that we have these two Roman testimonies that were almost first-hand. You have Tacitus, who was writing a few years after her death, and then Cassius Dio, who was there actually watching, her final battle, and saw her and apparently heard her, and manages to describe what she looked like and what this crime was that the Romans had committed against her, and why it was even as Romans, they felt it was justified, her anger, so it was coming to terms with a way of making that cinematic, and it took quite a long time. If I were a better writer, it would probably been a lot quicker, but it was somewhere around the 16 or 17 years before I finally finished a screenplay that I felt dealt with it in a way that was filmable. And then, I worked with an actress who I enjoyed working with and realized could play the part, and so the two coming together sort of rang in, the right timing for the film, really, It all sort of came together after 16 or 17 years overnight.
Like you said, that you were kind of helped by the fact that there's first-hand information out there. I know here in Australia, with Australian history, a lot of the time things are told third or fourth hand, and people dispute events and things like that. What was that like for you, being able to go back and actually read first-hand evidence?
Well, their evidence it's only a paragraph in the description of a rather large battle with Cassius Dio, and then with Tacitus, it's not much more than that. Again, 2 or 3 paragraphs, and so you have that basis. But what you also have is an amazing clean slate, because the Celts kept no written record, so they didn't have a written language in the way that we understand it now. So that's why we have the Dark Ages when the Romans left. We have great history and bookkeeping and evidence up to the point where the Romans left Britain, which is sort of 400, 500, and then from that point through to 1,000 or so, we don't really have a vast amount, because no one really wrote much down, and so it's called the Dark Ages, not because it was dark, but more because we just don't have much information from that time. The Celts are the same way. We have only the information that's left that we can sort of guess and piece together in terms of archaeology, and then what the Romans wrote about them. So with not much more than that 2 or 3 pages of actual history, everything else was based upon research and historical evidence of the time, and passions and things that were prevalent in Rome, and we could put those into the movie. So it was quite fun to do it. There was big open gaps that I could fill with what I felt like filling it with, as long as it match to the historical. What I wanted to do was put a little bit of mystery into it, a little bit of mythology and sort of a magical aspect to it, which I feel the Celts had in their society. That there's, from what I've read and have researched, was very much based in magic and what the Druids felt governed the world, which to them would have been completely normal. That would have been science. We as human beings take everything very much at face value. Everyone uses a cell phone, but I don't think very many people could build a cell phone, or tell you how it actually works.
Yeah.
In the same way with magic and religion and the way the world turns and what actually goes on, they were, they believed in a very different form. It was to do with the sun and the moon and the ground and the trees, and that was their. The seasons were very important to the Celts, and within that there was a form of magic that we would call magic today, but they would simply say was the way of things.
Yep.
I wanted that to be prevalent in the script. With where one person says, "Did you just see what happened?" and the rest of them go, "Yeah, no, it happens all the time. Don't worry about it." And the conversation carries straight on. Which is how human beings really deal with magical moments in all reality. We don't jump up and wave and point our fingers and go, "Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god." It doesn't really happen like that. We go, "Oh, okay, what's happening next?" And I wanted to sort of put that in there a little bit. It's my personal take on it. The Celtic religion, I feel a great affinity for it. So that I liked about having sort of a partial historical record of what happened. I think that gives you a little bit of freedom,
Yeah. So Jesse, tell us a little bit about that script writing process. This is obviously a project that meant a lot to you. What was that screenwriting process like for you to sit down and work out what goes in and what doesn't go into the story?
It's with these ones, it's very labor intensive for me. I'm not an indoors kind of person. I'm very, very outdoors. I came to directing through stunt work and being outdoors. So writing for me is it's laborious. It's hard. It's like doing surgery on myself,
Yeah.
But I do enjoy it. I enjoy it when it's done, and I like the process of laying it all out. This one took a long time. I'd written half the script for 15 years, and I just could not work out how to deal with this middle section. And then it came to me very, very quickly, and then the rest of the script wrote itself very quickly. And at that point, I had a 90-something page or 100-page script that I started sending out, and people liked it. But it's a strange process for me. It's not the most organic. It's very difficult, and I work very, very hard on it, and I'm very, very brutal with myself. And what I knew I didn't want to do was base this film on any other movies. I wanted to make sure it was all literary, it was all historical, it was all from books written in the 60s and the 50s and the 70s, that sort of thing. And just really, not fiction books, but non-fiction, and really just steep myself in that side of things, and know that the story itself would hopefully take care of the other elements, and I hope it did.
Yeah. You mentioned having trouble writing that middle section and about what the Romans did to her. Do you think, and how to bring that to the screen, do you think having shows like Game of Thrones and that these days that have shown pretty graphic scenes of torture and murder, do you think that's actually helped these days with films like this because people are more accepting of scenes like that?
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. The 70s were an extraordinarily violent period for movies.
Yeah.
So it's nothing new. I think if you have a compelling story and it touches people in a way, but I didn't want to show it. I didn't want to show what happened to the children. I didn't think that was filmable. I didn't think that's the kind of film that I wanted to make, and it was trying to work out how to do that without showing it, but still to get across. And I think the way I handled it in the film worked because hopefully the audience understands what's happened, but it takes about 15 minutes of screen time before you realize what has really happened, and what is going on, and that you're seeing a woman with deep, deep trauma who is suffering from a form of PTSD where she thinks these people still exist, and for me that was more profound because you realize that whatever she saw so affected her. that it has knocked her slightly off course mentally, and for me that was a more telling way of getting it across. You can show as much violence and blood and everything and make it realistic as you want in the world. People have seen it all before, and it's very difficult to shock people. But I think if you let people imagine something, the depravity and the level of their imagination is far more than you can come up with latex and fake blood. So I hope that's what was the end result, but I'm not sure. When it comes to the violence and the sword fighting, I show it all. That's fine. What I didn't want to do there was cop out with the 1950s kind of sword fight where people put the sword under their arm and went and fell backwards. To fight someone with a sword is a brutal and personal and nasty thing. You've got to hit someone 5, 6, 7 times before they die. It's it's very, if they're wearing armor, and this is traumatic. This is awful. You're both going to be bleeding and possibly dying, before the end of the battle. And I wanted people to understand the nature of warfare in those days and how the Romans were so good at it. They perfected armor and strategy of fighting in close quarters. They understood that. And to fight an army like that, you had to take on guerrilla tactics. And what Boudica did were the very origins of guerrilla warfare and how a smaller force can outwit and outsmart and take on a larger force. Of course, the very thing that gave her the strength was what ended up defeating her when her force became too strong, where the Romans then used those tactics against her. But that's sort of the interesting side of it. Hopefully some of that has come across.
Definitely, it definitely does. Now, I guess the big question for you was, who do you get to play Boudica? Olga does an absolutely amazing job in the film. So could you tell us a little bit about that casting process? Did you have actresses in mind when you first started out on the project, and what was it like working with Olga in the end?
Well, no, not at all. There was no one that I could think of that could play it and that would finance it, and so the script was lamenting and sort of gestating for those reasons, and it was there in my filing cabinet being worked on here and there, when I had time. And it wasn't until working with Olga on White Elephant, a film I directed in Georgia with Michael Rooker, that I suddenly realized that I may have found Boudica. And so at that point, I started working more in earnest and finished the film. And then to convince Olga, I flew to Paris with a painting of her as the middle-class housewife queen, and then a painting of her as Boudica, the warrior queen, with the no hair and the no eyebrows and the scarred face and broken nose. And I painted those 2 watercolors, and I said, look, you play this part where you start looking like this, and then through a churn of events, you end looking like this. And, the character arc is something spectacular, and I think you can do it. I think no one else can do it as well as you. Her qualms were that she was Ukrainian and not English, and to play someone so very, very precious to the English might upset them. I said, that's BS, there was no English language in 60 AD. The Celts were probably more Eastern European. The Celts and the Gaels all came from Eastern Europe to the UK. They were probably looked more like her and spoke more like her than most English people that we associate with Great Britain today, which is mainly, it's been weakened by this skinny Normans that came in around 1100 and diluted, the great English warrior race, So it was, they wouldn't have spoken English. They'd have spoken different languages for each different fiefdom, and there was no England as unified as we think of it now. There were tribes and cultures and villages and sects and groups that Boudica was the first to pull together. So I said, far from being the most inappropriate choice, you are the most appropriate choice to play Boudica. And so she came on board, and from there it was casting the other roles. And I knew Clive Standen through mutual acquaintance, and he had been in Vikings, and apparently, having some Viking alumni in the movie from the TV show Vikings was a help to the financing. So I called Peter Franzen, who I knew, and Lucy Martin, and that sort of put it over the edge. And then I talked Nick Moran into being Katastekianis, which is a very, very difficult role to play, and I know that Nick is particularly good at those kind of roles, and I think he did a phenomenal job. So it was really fun casting. Leo Gregory, who I'm a huge fan of from Green Street Hooligans, he was in a film I directed called Avengement as well, I brought in, and I think he did a wonderful, wonderful job as that sort of turns on Boudica. So it was a really I felt I was very blessed and lucky with the cast, and I think they did a great job, and I love that Olga is in it. But it was as much meeting her that got the green light to the movie as anything, meeting her in on the other production in Georgia.
Definitely. So Jesse, what was that like for you walking onto set and seeing this all come together? Like, this was, like you said, a project that you'd been working on for 15 years. What was that moment like, walking onto set and realizing that it was actually happening?
I mean, it's fulfilling. It's interesting. You don't really you're in the moment. You're just obsessed with all the issues that are not going quite as well as you want them to. So you never really sit down and pat yourself on the back and say, "This is great. This has worked out how I wanted it to." You look at, if 12 horses turned up, you are maddening because you wanted 20 horses, and you're just trying to figure out how to make everything as big and as bold and as brash and as romantic and as dramatic as you possibly can. But it was good to get the film made after such a long time in gestation, and but it's also heartbreaking as well as you're doing these, and you have a particular vision in mind, and so you're battling to do that. I think it's part of being a creative that you're always trying to push it to be more than it, more as much as it possibly can be.
Well, Jesse, the end result is absolutely fantastic, and I know a lot of our listeners are going to want to go out and check out this film. So to finish off, what would you like to say to our listeners out there who are about to sit down and watch Boudica for the first time?
I think to open their hearts to this woman from another era, from 2,000 years ago, who had this amazing dramatic life and what she went through, and to see if it rubs off in a positive way or not. I tried to make the story as, to honour her as much as possible. I felt an enormous and strange, to be honest, debt towards her walking around that, because, we were filming in, within 20 miles of Colchester, which was the first city that she burned to the ground. So there was every chance that she rode her chariot in the very locations that we filmed this film on. And more than any other film in my I've made 20 or 30 movies, 30 years in the business, I felt beholden to look after her story as much as possible. A strange kind of, a very strange kind of feeling. So I hope that when people watch it, they feel a little bit for Boudica and this awful experience she went through and what she didn't, to set the score right and make things good. And I hope that they learn something about a bit about her in a way that honours her.